Hi, I'm Kirby Allison, and we love to help the well-dressed take care of their wardrobes. I'm so pleased that I had the opportunity to sit down with iconic menswear author Alan Flusser. He's best known for having written the two most significant works on classic menswear of the 20th century, Dressing the Man and Styling the Man. Hardly a library exists of a well-dressed gentleman which does not include one, if not both, of these seminal works. Alan Flusser has easily had the greatest impact upon classic menswear since Beau Brummel. His work democratized and disseminated classic menswear to an entirely new generation of menswear enthusiasts. His books are no less relevant nor significant today than when they were first published some 30 years ago. In our two-part interview, I had the opportunity to visit with Alan at his bespoke atelier in New York City to learn about how he began and his current views on classic menswear. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we enjoyed making it.
So what was the catalyst for you? You know, you were a menswear designer doing sportswear for this company. And then, you know, kind of what catalyzed that transition?
After I made my first couple suits at Anderson Shepherd, I spoke French. So I would actually meet with Pierre, who was very happy to talk with me and stuff. And I was very happy to talk with him because he was such a, renowned, although I hated everything he ever did. I didn't think he had any taste. And I remember I had a double-breasted, one of the two suits was double-breasted. So I showed him Pierre. He says, "Oh, we have some," and this is like soft and drapey and stuff. And he said, "Oh, I have something like that." So he sends one of his guys upstairs, brings down a jacket. And if I tell you that the only resemblance to this jacket that I was wearing, double-breasted 6-on-2 jacket, was that, yes, his was double-breasted and had long sleeves. That was it. It had nothing to do with it. So I realized, of course, that his knowledge of menswear was limited. I used to do the fashion shows, which we had at the Four Seasons restaurant. They were morning shows. And one season, because we were his largest licensee, even though he must have had 150 licensees even in those days, we were his largest. He decides that he's going to come and attend the show, the fashion show. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting, but I can see that this could be a problem. Because a month before we do our show, he does his big show in Paris. So the same people are going to go to that show as are going to come to this show. And if he stands up and takes credit for clothes that don't look anything like the clothes that he just showed, that could completely backfire. I tried to have his man who represented him, who was really who's the French, famous French actor, Maurice Chevalier, look alike and talk alike. Oh, no, don't worry, no problem. Anyway, long story short, Pierre comes, he stands up and takes a bow, and the collection, which I'm designing, is like my Upper West Side collection. It has red corduroys and topsiders and yellow puffy coats. This is in the 70s. Doesn't look anything like Pierre Cardin. He really looked kind of, well, I don't know what it looked like. He stood up, and from that moment on, the fashion press were so upset with him in the United States that any time there was something that said either Pierre Cardin Menswear or Pierre Cardin Relax, which was the name of the collection, they would say by Alan Flusser. Now in the 70s,
there was the only way to differentiate.
Yeah, well, there was nobody doing collections for other designers.
Yeah.
There was only 3 designers or whatever, Cardin and Saint Laurent, whatever. So that catapulted me basically more quickly into my own business, which I then started in 1979 as a sportswear, kind of upper-end sportswear. And like everybody else, we weren't making any money. We weren't losing money, but we weren't making any money. And JCPenney decided that they wanted to go into the designer business. So they signed this humongous deal with Halston. $100 million minimum guarantee. First time anybody had signed with a mass retailer. And then after them, they decided on me, right? So they threw so much money, and I had a Japanese partner who had put up the $1 million or $2 million for the business, or to start the business. Anyway, everybody wanted to do the pennies thing, and I said, okay, fine, we'll do the pennies things, but then I have to do something very upscale to maintain the integrity of the name and stuff. So I said, I will start a custom tailor, whatever, which is what I did. And then, about 6 months into that business, the Wall Street people came from the Wall Street movie and asked me to do, the clothes. And then the movie came out, and then everybody wanted to dress like Michael Douglas. And the business went from like $600,000 the first year to $2.1 million, or something like that in the second year. We couldn't make clothes fast enough.
It was all custom.
All custom, yeah. And so this business, 33 years later, is that business. That's how it started. But I have a mass market collection that is sold through Steinmart stores. You must know Steinmart in Dallas. They have quite a few of them. The guy who owns Steinmart, Jay Stein, and I went to camp together. Okay. So we started a business in 2000. So that's a mass market business. And so then
sportswear?
Yeah, primarily sportswear. There's some neckwear. There's sport jackets.
Okay.
It's actually amazing. I've always kept this business. One, because we have an amazing, clientele, cross-section of people is rather interesting, and it allows me to make clothes that are pretty uncompromised. Not too many people have that,
Certainly here in the United
situation.
States, it's a dying breed.
Yeah.
So how did you go from there to writing the book?
I used to travel a lot for Cardin, all over the place, and people would always ask me, "Oh, I'm going to Tokyo. Where should I go?" Or "I'm going to Paris." And my brother finally said, "Well, why don't you just write a book about, stores and stuff like that?" And I said, "Well, you'll write it. I'll just give you the information because I'm not writing it. I'm not trained as a writer, and I don't have that kind of time." So we did. And just before I handed the book in, I thought, maybe I'll just put in like 5 or 10 things I think people should know, like how to tie a tie. And when I did the promotional tour for the book, I'd be in San Francisco. There were 5 or 6 stores in San Francisco and products in those stores that I recommended. The questions I would get were always about the how to dress part of it. So I thought maybe I should write a book on quote unquote how to dress. When I was 17 or 18, I was dating this girl who's now is actually I live with, and married in between for about 30 years. But her father was this kind of entrepreneurial guy, and he said, for someone who thinks more about like the linings of jackets than anyone else that I've probably read, he has to have his clothes made. So he said, "Why don't you come with me to the tailor?" I said, "Okay." I helped him pick out stuff, and I watched the fittings and made whatever kind of observation. And he liked the results. And he said, "Look, I have 4 or 5 friends who, like me, are oversized, but we can afford good clothing. And you could take them to the tailor. You could charge them for that. And then you could charge the tailor for bringing them, business." I said, "Well, that sounds great."
Yeah.
So at the time, I was a championship golfer, so I was going to school for that. And, on the side, I would do this thing. So instead of asking the tailor to pay me money for taking the clients there, I just said, "Look, you'll make me clothes, right, in exchange for that." So from the age of 17 or 18, I've had my clothes custom made. And, one thing when you're, having expensive clothing made is you can learn pretty quickly what's, going to be obsolete, early, or what not is going to be obsolete. So when I went for my job interview, I just showed people like, 8 garments that I had designed, so to speak, had made at tailor. So that was my training. So by the time I got to start the custom shop, I had already, created the clothing around Anderson Shepherd wool, other stuff around the world. Well, the custom business I started in 85.
85.
My own business, the sportswear business, was in 79.
79. So then how did you, so you wrote this first book about traveling and shopping, and you put this section in about just the basics.
Right.
You saw that was getting more questions, and then you go to Clothes on Demand.
Yeah, that came out in 1986. And for a lot of people who have followed my career, that was first became aware of me, and those were the first time that you saw those Esquire illustrations in a book in a long time. So that introduced that, and that was the precursor. When that book came out, that book sold close to 100,000 copies and sell them through GQ, through the New Yorker, through the various magazines. They sell a book. And so the book got, was the basis of a lot of people's first introduction, not just to me, but to, this Englishified Savile Row, mentality of dressing. And basically I wrote 2 books after that. One was a update of the dressing book, and then Dressing the Man, which was really a kind of compilation update of the Clothes of the Man. But I've always felt very tutorial. I mean, there's no point, in having accumulated all of this knowledge and experience and not being able to share it with people because,
Yeah. Well, you were the first one to really democratize that information. I mean, normally it was something that only one who had the opportunity and the privilege to really you live in that world
That's right.
would ever experience or know.
Right.
And to take that and put it on paper and then share it, and the form of the book was, in some ways, quite revolutionary.
The shopping book, the second shopping book, had in all of my own competitors, people who were, at that point I was in the business of. So when I wrote that, I had to write about my own shop, right, as one of the shops to go to, which was a very interesting experience, writing about your own store. This guy's got lots of opinions, or whatever, talks a lot or whatever. But I, I try to take my designer or business hat off and put my journalist hat on and, include for people those tailors that I thought were great, those shirt makers that I thought were great, people who were really in direct competition, but it didn't really matter. That book really, some people bought the original book, which had all of the tailors and stuff in London and Vienna, wherever. But a lot of people, the Style and the Man book, the third book. Well, anyway, those 2 books probably, as much as any books, introduced people to the world of the particular makers and stuff. And they were interesting stories. I mean, everybody had a great story and came from a very interesting background and handed down, skills, over generations and stuff. And I felt like, it was my privilege to be able to help them perpetuate their businesses. Otherwise, they wouldn't,
None of this would exist for any of us.
they wouldn't exist. So if you had to give the menswear industry a grade based on how many stylishly dressed men they turned out on an annual basis, and you look at, let's say, the best dressed list of Vanity Fair, and they struggle every year to come up with a handful. Okay, they don't have to be well known, and they don't have to dress like me or you or whatever, but just like their own style. Most of the people who make it, who are on that list are either celebrities or whatever. So how is it, it's kind of a question I asked in Dressing the Man, how is it that so much interest and focus can be spent, and so many opportunities to buy clothes, so much clothes design, so many different price points, and yet there are so few people who are well dressed to show for it? How do you explain that? It's the primary thesis of Dressing the Man, and that is, if you don't know the fundamentals as they apply to you personally, then no amount of fashion, no amount of money is going to enable you to become well dressed. And I want to qualify, not well dressed by my standards, but someone who has a sense of style, can put clothes together. Anytime I see a young person who can do that, or is moving down the road to do that, my first question is, well, how did you get to this point, let's say? And you usually find that it's some kind of personal odyssey that person has chosen, not that he learned it from this place or whatever. I mean, that it's kind of curated together, lots of these different influences, but it's been his own initiative to a certain degree, which is really unfortunate. I mean, the information in Dressing the Man should be information that's available in many different venues, not just, through a book. If you don't, do you play golf or tennis or anything?
Yeah, tennis.
Tennis, okay, so I'm a tennis player. So, if you don't have, if you don't bring the racket back early enough and have your eye on the ball when it meets the, like Federer, and move your feet, you can play tennis all day long, but you're never going to get that much better. There's a technical expertise that you need to build around. Same thing with golf. Stance, your head position in relationship to the ball, etc. There are a lot of people who play golf and practice and they get better, but they can never really manifest their potential as real golfers because they're limited, because the fundamentals of their game are not in place. So if you don't know the correct shape of clothing that's the most flattering for you and why, and that positively impacts your complexion and why, then you can have, closets full of clothes, but it's not going to really matter because without those, starting points to build around, you're never going to learn how to dress well. So today we have, and have had, if you want an example, you look at the people who show up for the awards, red carpet dressing. They have people, picking their clothes. If you have someone picking your clothes, you are never going to learn how to dress well. Mm-hmm. Because part of the whole experience of learning how to dress is buying something and then finding out it doesn't work for some reason.
Yeah. Or
that it really works, and isn't that surprising, or why that is. So you have that, and then of course, in dressing the man, there's pictures of guys who in outfits that are 50 or 60 years old, and they look as stylish to a certain degree now as they did then, because the clothes were made for them, for their particular physique. We're trying to, as it says, permanent, fashion, trying to teach people how to, dress in a manner that over the long term you can sustain.